Hello, Strangelings. Welcome to another thrilling episode of Getting Strange with Steffany Strange. And I have such a special gift for you, an exclusive interview with the cast of Presence. It truly feels like everybody on this set has had somewhat of a paranormal experience, and we're going to be getting into it. Before we get into today's episode, if you are watching me on video, yes, I'm in a different setup. That's because we are updating the office room. So I can't wait for you guys to see the new paint that would be put on the room. I know I've done some live streams in the past where I've asked people and I've asked you guys if you're listening and you also watch my live stream, what color should I paint the background? And some of you guys said black and other colors and stuff. So I listened. I went to go look for a color, and I think we have a good color coming up. So stay tuned for that. Right now, I'm actually filming in my living room. So it does look a little bit like not messy, but you can see like a box over here. That's because we had to take stuff out of the office to make room to paint. Anyway, you probably don't care about this. That is okay. I'm gonna now segue into the episode, which I'm so excited for because I read the Q&A notes with the director and the producer, and they shared their paranormal experiences. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind as I share a little bit of what I thought about the movie. This is a spoiler-free episode, so do not worry about any spoilers, but I will be giving you a little bit of notes and summaries on what you can reflect on when you watch the film because I was blown away by the concept of this film. And there were a lot of scenes where it truly felt like I was the ghost lurking in the house, watching this family live their lives. And I almost think that if I were to watch this film in like VR or something, it would be kind of trippy. I already felt kind of like a creepy lurker in the house watching it. But if you watch it in VR, oh my God, that's gonna be freaking trippy. So you're probably wondering, what is this movie about? Well, that's a great question because it's about this family that buys a brand new home. Well, they move into a home and it has history and it's beautiful. It has character and it really focuses in on this teenage girl named Chloe who is dealing the loss and grieving the loss of her friend that passed away. And so now you're probably wondering, well, Stephanie, how did this concept come about? Well, that's a great question because now we're going to get into the director and the writer and what a great combination this is. And it makes sense that they came up with this storyline and the way that this was executed was very eerie and beautifully done in a very eerie way, if you know what I mean. So the director is Steven Soderbergh and the screenwriter is David Koepp. And again, great combination. So you might have seen Soderbergh's works through Ocean's 11, Traffic, and Sex and Lies in Videotape. And while Koepp has worked on such iconic scripts like Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible, Death Becomes Her, and much more. And I just feel like already with these three scripts, like, oh my God, some of these are like cult classics, I would say. They're just a franchise that will live on for decades, forever, seriously. So just keep this in mind when you watch this work because it is very interesting how they bring to life this paranormal, supernatural story. There was a Q&A and Steven Soderbergh shared this very interesting and very chilling backstory about his Los Angeles home. Allegedly, there was a death or something like that. And this is what he said. You're just gonna have to like I'm going to just quote it verbatim, okay? Quote, "It is a true fact that somebody died in this house before we moved in. It is a rumor that the person that died in this house was a mother killed by her daughter." End quote. Now I'm going to add my thoughts here. I just, that's chilling, right? It's not as like infamous as like a Gypsy Rose story or the Menendez brothers. I feel like we've been hearing so much of that. So of course, when I read about like a daughter killing her mother, Stephen, you have to look further into this. Like you can't just leave us like with this very morbid, tragic tale and like say it might be a rumor. Like, come on, sir, you have to look into this home because now I'm gonna be waiting and wanting to know more of the backstory of this tragic tale. So then he says, "We were aware of this when we bought the house. And from that point, there was the occasional weird, did I turn off that light moments. I never felt threatened by this. I wasn't afraid of it. It didn't really register at all. And it probably would have just fizzled out if it were not for the fact that we had a house sitter who was watching TV one evening. So there's this long hallway that leads to the bedroom, and this person felt some sort of presence. She looked up and saw the figure of a woman cross the end of the hallway into the bedroom. The house sitter instinctively shouted for Jules's name. And by the way, Jules is the wife of Steven. Anyway, immediately she realized that Jules was not there. I mean, that's why she is house sitting, right? And she immediately called Jules, who then relayed what we had heard. And the house sitter responded, "Well, what the fuck? Why didn't you tell me that?" When I hear such stories, I think, why doesn't this stuff happen to me? This sounds super exciting. End quote. And then he says, "I began thinking along the lines of a presence in a house and the new person or people who come into the house. How would the presence feel about that? I wrote that up and roughly sent it to David." So that is the origins of the movie. They were also inspired by the 1944 movie called The Uninvited. And I watched a trailer and it does look like your standard paranormal, someone's haunting your home type of thing. I haven't watched it or anything like that, but if you have watched it, let me know, make a comment on it. So now that we talked about Steven's encounter, let's talk about David's paranormal encounter and how that played a role for this film. So David Koepp said, "For a time Langham, I lived in Langham in New York, a big creepy old building on 74th and Central Park West. I was watching TV one night and looked down a hall and saw a figure move past when no one should have been there. And I never had an experience like that. I found it really weird and striking because no one was down there, and surely I saw a figure cross the end of the hall." So several months later, I mentioned this to my 17-year-old son, Nick. And so as like David is trying to explain it, his son cuts him off and says, "At the end of the hall down from the living room." So my thoughts on this is the fact that his son not only confirmed the exact spot, but finished the thought before David could. Well, that's a next level of just like confirmation. It's so compelling. I love ghost stories where you experience it with more than one other person, especially the ones where you are experiencing it alone and then you tell it to the other person living there and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've been having that experience too." And that's why I always tell people, if you have a paranormal experience and you have it by yourself and you live with somebody, it's good to share these stories because you just never know if that other person might have experienced it. So don't just for a second think, "I'm not going to share with so and so because no one's going to believe me," when in fact, you can probably figure out if someone else is having that experience too, and then confirm if it's paranormal. So now that we shared like these experiences about both David and Steven, what I found really fascinating was how both Steven and David had very unique upbringings around and adjacent to the paranormal, which I feel very much was very important for the movie in Presence. So like Steven grew up in a home where his mother explored parapsychology, and I kind of love that because he kind of grew up seeing his mother's work and who she worked with and the type of people that would come around. David was raised in a very Catholic household. And for those of you that don't know, there's a lot of like supernatural belief systems in the Catholic world. And there's even like Catholic folklore magic, which really does draw in those people who work in spells, witchcraft, if you will. I mean witchcraft in a very nice, I mean that in a nice way, not in a very derogatory way, because I feel like people kind of like use the terminology to like say, "Oh, that's witchcraft, that's nonsense." But there's a lot of brujeria in folklore, Catholic magic that we can talk about in a different time. While they are contrasting experiences, they both deal with the unknown and the supernatural in some aspects. And I know they both talked about, I believe, being atheist. I mean, I could be very wrong, but it was in the Q&A how they both had referenced, the whole idea of atheism and all of that jazz. But I just think that it's so interesting that they did grow up in a home that, in a way, would welcome supernatural elements and exploring that to the skeptic side, to having like experiences that they can't explain away. And so I kind of like that a little bit because it's two people that not only are talented in storytelling and bringing stories to life, but they do have some experience with the paranormal. And I, as a person that does a lot of paranormal content, paranormal investigates, I do psychic work. I feel like this was a refreshing film where it wasn't just like over sensationalizing ghosts. It wasn't trying to exploit you into ghosts and villainize ghosts in such a very severe way in ways that other movies do, like the Exorcist films. Like they're like, I use a pendulum, so I was possessed. So I feel like if you like the paranormal, you are going to enjoy the film for that. Yeah, speaking of upbringings, I got to interview the younger cast of Presence, and I think this is such an important part because a lot of the film, again, really is drawing in through the perspective of a younger person, a teenager that's dealing with a dysfunctional family, with trauma, with grieving, and how does that manifest and how does that look like? And so I'm gonna and so let's get into the Q&A with them. So in the paranormal, there's a belief that vibrations and unresolved trauma and emotions can attract entities. Have you guys ever experienced anything with the unknown or paranormal?
Hmm. I have. Sorry, I'm just taking a moment to think about what you just said.
The
Yes.
vibrations was so
Yeah.
intriguing.
That was very intriguing facts.
You know,
think
sound of
yeah.
vibrations, set like light, like it's all right. The whole world is just one giant vibration, and so I think tapping into that like is definitely a super. You know, I love the way that it's explained in Presence, in that it is it's like you have this door, we all have this door, and when we're dreaming, it slightly cracks open, but then for some people, it's just completely slammed open, wide open.
With trauma.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and this is for both Eddie and Wes, since your characters kind of deal a little bit more with the darker side of the elements within the film. Do you think that unsolved family traumas or hidden secrets haunt people in real life? And if so, do you think that can also manifest supernatural elements into that person's everyday life?
Yeah, 100%. I think presence is kind of that playing out in a story. You know, the reason the presence exists is because it has something it needs to do that it couldn't resolve in its past life. And I think that's kind of a metaphor for how, you know, we all have these things we regret that can either end relationships or, you know, if that person ends up leaving us to go to, you know, heaven or whatever, that is left lingering in us. So.
Love that. Kalina, your character with the unknown or the supernatural element in the house is a little bit different. And with that being said, do you think that if you were experiencing a real life haunting such like that, would you be more willing to want to banish it? You know, people use like different elements, whether it's incense, sage, or some people even give it offerings to make peace with it. How would you handle uh, your interaction with that in real life?
Well, I actually experienced something similar in my first year of university in my student housing that was converted from an old people's home. So there were a lot of, I guess, unsettled spirits. And in my dorms, there was actually a spirit that I coexisted with for my first year, me with 3 other girls. Yeah, I would wake up with no one in the house, but writing on the wall, we would feel things go behind us, we'd see shadows. And at first I was scared, but then to me, it just felt like this is also his space that I need to respect. So I don't know, I tried to reach out and create just boundaries to coexist together. That being said, if I was Chloe in Chloe's exact situation, I'm not sure if I would be that wanting to get close with the presence the way that she did, but I definitely wouldn't be scared.
And lastly, for everybody, do you think that because this is from the perspective of a younger audience and the perspective of a younger teenager experiences, do you think they're more susceptible to the supernatural?
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the younger you are, the more magical the world seems, the more, you know, questions left unanswered. And I think especially, you know, for these teens, they all have this. I mean, it's hard to be a teenager. It's hard to function in the world where you're in this in-between and no one really gets you, and you have all these, you know, physical and emotional elements of your life that are changing. And so I think you very much can either turn to something like a presence as either a friend or a foe. And so I think that was a dynamic that was very beautifully explored in this film.
Well, beautifully said. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I was not expecting for Chloe to share that ghost story, but it just goes to show that when you can have these experiences, you can draw in these experiences and bring it into a role. And we're going to get more into that in the later episodes, the more I bring in other cast people and directors for their films that revolve around horror, paranormal, and the supernatural. So just keep an eye out for that. But I'm going to end, before I end it on a note, I want to give you a bonus cast story. So in my earlier episodes on Getting Strange with Steffany Strange, I did do an episode about the about celebrities, whether they're actors, actresses, musicians, and their experiences with ghosts and being intimate with ghosts. So it's going to be like one of the top 3 first episodes that I did on this podcast. So make sure that you watch it. It's literally called like Hollywood Doing the Deed or something like that. But I'm going to link it in the description notes. And Lucy Liu was brought up on there. She talks about her experiences with a ghost. And I think it's really fascinating to bring that in. So I thought it was really cool that they brought her on for this film. Even though like she didn't have a big role in it, I did really like that, knowing like this paranormal buff, me being the paranormal buff, seeing that I was like, oh, interesting. And Julia Fox is also into the paranormal. So it says here that Julia Fox had shared her belief that in her New York City home, it was haunted by a ghost, friendly ghost, named Beauty. And then she talks about how there was a shrine dedicated to the spirit in the basement. Julia then says Beauty was the matriarch of the home who watches over her family and mentions that her son has often seen this apparition. So I will be also linking that in the description below. All right, guys. So if you loved this episode, make sure to do me a huge favor, do something nice, and give me a 5-star review. Add a beautiful comment if you'd like, and I will see you guys next time. Make sure to check out my Discord channel. I'm also setting up a Reddit thread for this podcast. So it's going to be called Getting_Strange. Do not look up Getting Strange because, oh my God, it's some corn stuff, okay? So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And if you want to give me a shout out on Instagram, feel free to do so. I thank you again so much for being here with me, you guys. I will see you next week. And remember, stay strange.